What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Building Code, where today I'm flying solo. Once again, sad music plays, right? We're going to make sure that Charlie gets back in the studio here at some point, but he's probably somewhere in Europe having the time of his life, spending time with his new fiance. Good for him. Some of us have to stay back in Nebraska, but that's okay. We've got a great conversation today. I can't wait to get into it. A little financial management with Kathy Svetina. She is the owner of NewCastle Finance, which she is a fractional CFO. She has got a long and storied career where she spent 14 years doing senior level financial planning and analysis for Fortune 500 companies. And she understands all about how financial information helps drive business forward. And she's on a mission to really work with our contractors who need better financial reporting, and especially the WIP report. So we're going to have an entire episode getting a grip on WIP. So let's not delay. She's also got a podcast where she talks about just small business in general. She'll tell us all about that. I'm really excited to have her on. Let's get her in here. Hey, Kathy, welcome to the Building Code. It's your first time on the Building Code, but you're a veteran, so this won't be a problem for you. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on, Zach. I really appreciated being here.
Absolutely. No, the pleasure's all ours. And, really, it really comes down to, we want to talk to you about some important topics in the construction space, like WIP. And I tell you what, I travel a lot for Buildertrend, and this may be the most popular topic that comes up in the seminars and the event. So I'm really excited to dive in. Before we do that, I want to give our listeners a little bit of context. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your business and what you really do. And also, of course, tell us a little about your podcast.
Sure. So I'm a fractional CFO, which means that I work as a CFO in a lot of businesses for a fraction of the time, for a part-time of the time. And I work a lot with remodeling and construction businesses. So when we're talking about WIP, I see this all the time, people not having WIP and their financials being an absolute mess, and people have no idea what's happening. So I'm really glad that we're talking about this. I've been doing finances for a little over to the 20 years, but I've had my own company, NewCastle Finance, doing fractional CFO work for the last 5 years.
Wow. Yeah, it says in my notes as I'm kind of looking over that you also spent some time at Fortune 500 companies. So you've got quite a story, a journey. When did you actually go off on your own? How much time did you spend outside of kind of in the corporate structure and then off on your own?
So the corporate structure was 15 years altogether, different types of companies. The last company that I was in banking. And then I realized that's not what I want to be doing. And for the last 5 years, I've had my own fractional CFO service. And because, as you've talked about, I do also have my own podcast, because everything that you do in your business is and eventually end up in your finances. So on my podcast, Help My Business Growing, we talk about a lot of different topics. We talk about operations, HR, sales, marketing, because everything is important when you think about your finances. So I got a lot of questions about these different topics. Obviously, I'm not an expert in those, but I know people who are, and we discuss these topics that can eventually end up in your finances. So Help My Business Growing is the podcast.
I love it. That makes a lot of sense. Word of mouth, right? Get those listeners out there, and naturally they connect with you and they're like, I want to work with Kathy, right? I am curious, why construction? When you decided to go off on your own and do these things, did you have an ideal client, or have they just sort of naturally gravitated towards you, kind of brought you to the industry? I talk to a lot of customers and Buildertrend customers that it's a little, I call it a quilt. They all have a little bit of different story of how they ended up in construction, which is a very important segment of the economy, obviously, but there's a noted labor shortage and people actually not going into the construction space. So what brought you to it, or did they find you?
That's a great question. And I've always kind of been interested in construction. And before I started my own business, we actually remodel our own house. And I had to deal a lot with contractors. We actually had a construction company that was obviously building our house. And I really fell into the deep end, basically being a project manager for a year. And so I could tell you all about
the contractor.
The what?
For the contractor, like you were like running the project for them, or you were having to coordinate your own?
No, I wasn't running the project for them. But even though we had a general contractor, there was still a lot of things that they needed my input on. Yeah. So I kind of fell into the deep end of this, and I'm always like curious about different industries. So that's how this interest in construction and remodeling started. And then through talking to them, I realized that they have a problem with financials. Like they just didn't know, like, are they making money? Are they not making money? So I figured, if there's one person, there's probably a couple of other people. And that's how I fell into this industry.
Yeah.
And it's been a fascinating field.
Yeah. And that's been kind of the last 14 years is kind of working with this or with this industry.
For the last 5 years.
5 years. Got it. Okay. So yeah, that's really an interesting background and context. It's like you're a fractional CFO and like a fractional project manager. And it lines up really nicely with the way that a lot of our customer stories are. I'm kind of the same way. I was a teacher, ended up leaving teaching for very unrelated reasons. It's just kind of an accident. Found Buildertrend, ended up loving contractors, have continued to stay in roles where I'm working with them. So we got a lot in common. Podcast host, fell into construction, good stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the WIP and why it is so important for profitability. Let's just kind of give, for listeners that hear that, interesting. I've had different people tell me what WIP is. And, there's like accounting WIP versus writing a project WIP. Let's just like clear the air here from the fractional CFO herself. What is the WIP report?
So WIP report stands for work in progress. So essentially it's a progress of all your jobs that are currently running that you're actively working on, not the ones that you have completed, but the ones that you're working on. And what you're looking for is, obviously, when you're doing a job, you're doing estimates, and then you have an estimate of how much you're actually selling it for, and then how much the cost is going to be. So throughout this job, you are basically looking at how much cost has come through, how much you have billed to your clients or your customers, and what is your current profitability. And this is really important because as things are happening, like for example, you have a couple of change orders coming through. This is going to significantly change your jobs and what you thought that you were gonna make and how much cost is going to be. So you want to make sure that you're keeping a pulse on this versus at the end when the job is finished, because as the job is going, you can mitigate some of the issues that you have. Like something is running over budget. What can we do about this? And on top of that, it's also giving you a lot of information about the future, meaning how much cost is still going to come through, how much you still need to bill your clients. And the reason why that is important too, because that is significantly going to affect your cash flow in the future. So it's a work in progress. It's a wealth of information about your finances. And it's such a crucial report in remodeling and construction in construction industry.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a little bit of a forecasting tool, as you said, to be able to project, but it's also a report that's very actionable. Like you're underbilling. So you should probably do something about that, because then otherwise you're not going to be able to fund the job, or it's coming out of your pocket to fund the job, right? Are there any other implications of the WIP or insights that it can provide besides those two very obvious use cases?
And this is a really important one, underbilling, meaning that you're actually using your own money to fund the cost. So you want to make sure, if you want to be in a situation, whether you're underbilling and overbilling is where you have more money coming in from the customer versus what you've actually paid out. So if in terms of the cash flow position, this is where you truly want to be. And so that you're not using your own money, you're actually using your customer's money to pay for the job. And that is one significant thing that if you don't have a work in progress report, there's no way you'll be able to see this. Absolutely no way. And the other thing that is also really important about the work in progress report is if you don't have that adjustment made in your financial statements, your profit and loss statement, your income statement is going to look like a roller coaster. Because if your accountant is not doing that adjustment in the financial statements, and I see this all the time, remodelers and construction people are so confused by it. And the reason for that is because if you are in this industry, you're taking a lot of cash up front, and that is going to end up on your profit and loss statement, but the costs are going to trickle down later on. So what you're going to see is, I have so much profit in today, but 3 months from now, all the cost is going to come through, and you're panicking like, oh my God, where my money is going. I have no money left. Like my profit and loss statement just doesn't make sense to me. And that is the reason why work in progress report, adjustment on your financial statements, it's crucial to do that in this industry. And this is a specific problem in remodeling and construction industry. You don't really see that in any of the other industries.
Yeah. Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, aren't there tax implications as well if your P&L and your other, more business health reports are misreported to the IRS? So it also can affect even more surprise costs or fees, or, it has huge implications if you're not staying on top of these details. I'm an amateur, but is that also a risk?
Yes, 100% yes. Because especially if your jobs are crossing fiscal years. So for example, if you started a job in 2023 and you have gotten majority of the cash from your customers, right? So they have paid you. So you have gotten the majority of those bills in 2023 from your customers. But the actual cost for that the majority of that is going to come in 2024. What is going to look like in 2023 is that you have so much more net income because there's no cost associated with that. Remember, that's coming in 2024. And in 2024, you're going to have a loss. So it evens out eventually, but the problem is that you have to prepay all of these taxes that you don't really owe. So if your accountant is not aware of that and it's not doing those adjustments, it's not really doing you any service.
And you mentioned, so this is a unique problem in construction. So other industries don't have to use a WIP report, or is it just something that has been applied to construction because of the unique dynamic of the project types, the way that it's like declared to the IRS, non-contractor based work, all those things?
Other industry have different. So the way how this is called, it's called a revenue recognition, when you actually recognize revenue. So there's different industries have different issues. Like for example, if you're a SaaS company and you're taking a lot of subscription up front, so they're going to have a similar issue if they're not adjusting that on their financial statements. So they have a similar issue, but the work in progress report, the way how it's designed for the remodeling and construction, it's very custom to remodeling and construction. So you don't see that in any of the other industries. But the whole issue with the revenue recognition can be seen in other industries as well. But this is a specific problem with the WIP for the remodeling and construction.
Sure. So is it common for accountants who maybe aren't familiar with construction to give advice on accounting without considering the WIP report?
Yes, unfortunately. And I see this all the time too. And the problem with that is because a lot of the accountants, and especially like bookkeepers, if they don't understand this industry, they're not going to be doing WIP. They might not know how to do WIP, or if they do, they might do it wrong. And one of the main things about WIP too is if you want it to be accurate, if you need to have systems in place that actually allow you to do this. And this is where Buildertrend is such a tool that I really, really like, because you have a central repository of all these estimates and change orders and all the costs that have come through and all the purchase orders, and everything is in one place. So that work in progress reporting, it's really easy to do, is because you're not going from, spreadsheet to spreadsheets and it's in all these different folders and it's a mess. You just go into one system of truth that it's going to give you that information. And then it's so easy to take the information that you have about your contract and then compare that to your accounting system. And that's why a lot of the accountants and bookkeepers don't do these things, is because it's kind of impossible to do it and it takes a really long time. And the information might be not accurate because they have to go to all these different spreadsheets to go and produce this WIP report. And at the end of the day, it just might not be accurate even.
Yeah. That is a scary proposition. You could be out there listening to this thinking, well, I do WIP. And now you're thinking, do I do WIP right? How do they go about remedying whether or not their WIP processes, if they have them, are correct or not? What would be your recommendation?
So if you don't have WIP, the revenue is essentially going to be whatever you have billed in that particular month. So, and again, it's not going to adjust whether the cost has come through or not. And this is where that, roller coaster P&L comes through. So for example, in May, your customer is going to give you $100,000 because you are remodeling their house, and then your costs are going to come in the next 4 months. But because they have already given you money today, they don't have to give you money in the next 4 months, or whatever the draws are. So you're going to see that income completely hitting you in 1 month, but the cost is going to come in the next month. So you're going to have that mismatch, and that's why we call this in accounting, the technical term is revenue recognition, how you actually recognizing your revenue. And I know this sounds very technical, but it's super, super important for construction and remodeling, because if you're not matching your revenue with cost, it's really going to make it hard for you to understand your financial statement. So it's super important for the accountants and bookkeepers to do those WIP adjustments on your financial statements. And if they're not, you will see that on your financial statements. And I can tell you this right now, if you're constantly like scratching your head, like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, I have all this money, but like I'm constantly feeling like I'm behind, like it's not enough and I don't know how things are going. Mm-hmm. That's probably because they're not adjusting your financial statements with work in progress report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing about construction, right? It's so risky. There's all these moving parts. You've got costs coming in the door constantly. It's really easy to lose track of what's buying what, who's funding what. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't think we do that, or I don't think we do that right, that's why we bring on people like Kathy to, give a resource, someone that you can reach out to help look at these things, or at least, like Kathy, you touched on this, finding someone that can help you, depending on what's going on with your business or community. What is your process like when you bring on a client? Do you diagnose their financial statements? Do you get down to like even their cost codes in Buildertrend? Are you doing full architecture of financial design, or is it just really like getting their mechanics around how they use WIP or other principles?
So it really depends. When first the client comes in, I do a whole full assessment of their finances. And I call this like a financial house. So essentially, I'll look at their bookkeeping and accounting, how it's actually done and how their accounting people are doing this. And then we take a look at what do they have for financial analysis, because now that you have data, what are you actually doing with it is the next step. We're not just here to gather data and to have a bunch of reports. It's like, are those reports actually giving you insights that you need to have to actually run your business well? And then the third thing we're looking at is all of your financial systems and processes, because that is super important. Again, you can create a report, but if you cannot create it on a monthly basis with ease, and if you're constantly like scrambling, then that's not going to be good. So you need data that is accurate, up to date, and it's easily accessible, and that is where the process and the systems comes in. And then the fourth piece is obviously financial planning, making sure that you have budgets, that you have regular forecasts, that you have cash flow forecasts, and also that you have plans for the future, where you want to be in the next year, 3 years, 5 years, because we want to plan for that as well. And then the fifth piece, which is really important, and it's so easily forgotten in the small business space, is what we call internal controls, making sure that you're safeguarding the asset, so that essentially what it means that you're not giving all your access to just one person, because they can do a lot of damage to your business. I mean, I've had clients that they have been stolen from their bookkeepers, unfortunately. I mean, it's very uncomfortable to think about, but it does happen in the small business space. So what are you doing to prevent that, actively prevent that? And so the assessment looks at all these 5 pieces. And then, of course, I look at what do you have in place that you need to have in place. And then we put a plan together and then we execute it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. And makes a lot of sense, especially on the controller piece, having checks and balances, right? Not having things that are easily missed because one person is the gatekeeper. And scalability wise too, it makes it more difficult if there's natural bottlenecks in the business. Something I kind of forgot, I lost my train of thought with WIP, is how often are people running WIP? Is it a monthly, quarterly? What's kind of the frequency that you recommend that people are looking at running a WIP report?
That's a great question. So I think of it as WIP is obviously it's as much of a management report, making sure that you're actually making good decisions about the business and that you're getting insights on your job. And also it's a report to adjust your financial statements so that financial statements are accurate. So for adjusting of your financial statements, making sure that they're accurate, you only need to do it once a month. So at the end of the month, when you're closing your books, when the accountant or bookkeeper are closing your books, they should be doing a work in progress report, and they should be adjusting those financials based on the work in progress report. So that's one piece. However, if you want to take a look at your WIP let's say every week, because you want to know how your jobs are doing, and if you have the systems and the process in place that allows you to do that accurately, for sure, like run it every week if you can. Mm-hmm. So at least once a month, but if you can do it more often, and if it actually gives you more insights, then sure.
When someone is setting up a WIP process, what are the most common pitfalls that people make when actually like going through the mechanics of running a WIP report? Is there a cost they forget to include, or, what's the scope of WIP?
So the number one thing that it's a common mistake is not having the correct data. And the reason that's why tools like Buildertrend are so good, because you have a central repository of all the estimates, of all the change orders that you might be doing, all the costs that have come through. So having that accurate information, so that is number one. So the systems and the process that you have to actually run this report are super, super, super important. Because if you're just, guessing, hey, I did a change order for, I think it was $10,000 and I think it went here. It's just, you're guessing. Mm-hmm. And when you're guessing, you don't have accurate information. And if you're just guessing, then it's like, should I really do that? And then that's where a lot of people just don't end up doing it. And then obviously the number one other thing is then people just don't do it because it's too much work and it takes too much time and it's too much involvement. And I will tell you that for a client, one of the clients that I did it for, we actually automated as much as we could. And work in progress report actually takes about an hour and a half in a month, which is like, it's almost unheard of. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you want to do it, if you can, you want to do it in a short amount of time. But because they have a lot of jobs and there's a lot of moving pieces, it takes about an hour and a half every single month. And before that, they just didn't have anything. So it can be done, but you need to have the right systems and a process behind it that actually support it. So I hope that answers your question, Zach.
Yeah, I think the follow-up to that is if you were looking for a way to improve your WIP, the reality is a lot of the day-to-day operations need to be really sound. You got to be doing the data entry in a tool like Buildertrend, and you got to make sure your employees are following the right procedures. This is all these things that will end up being costs on a project, soft costs, indirect costs. If you're cost plus, right, it all kind of ends up being a cost in some capacity. And that's the thing that and my clients that I work with, they struggle with, because it's habitual changes in their day to day, and it's very granular. But I always like to dangle the carrot. It's like, but if you do these things, what you get is better financial decisions, long-term planning, profitability. Maybe you can take a vacation. An hour and a half a month is way better than a tax audit where you don't know and you're paying fines and, having to go through an adjuster and all the things that go with it. And to your point with like change orders, construction is very risky. Handshake agreements on something like a change order ends up in lawsuits, litigation. Those are way more expensive than being, having to get people to follow procedures that protect you. It's all risk management to some degree. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah. And, this industry lives and dies by good project management as well. And good project management is not just what also falls into this umbrella is obviously documented, because if you're just shaking a hand to someone and for a $20,000, what would be a $20,000 change order, the customer can turn around in 3 months and say, I don't remember you ever telling me about this. Or you said it's going to be 10,000 and now it's your word versus their word. And you're going back and forth. It makes it for a bad financial outcome. Mm-hmm. And 2, makes it for a very bad customer experience as well, because now they're pissed off and you're kind of mad because now you're not getting the money. So documenting this is so, so important. And the other thing you mentioned before about the cost codes, the way how you set up these tools and your accounting system is also important as well. So they need to really be talking to each other. That's an important piece. And with the cost codes, you can be as granular as you need to be and as you want to be. So if you're, for example, if you want to go and track nails, you can do that as well, if that is an important piece when you're making financial decisions. There's always a balance between how granular you go versus how much is it actually useful to you. So if you're seeing yourself being super granular, but you don't really need that, just don't go there, because then it's just going to create a lot of problems with when you're looking at the jobs and you're like, I don't know, this item's supposed to be here, but now it's actually here. So make it, all of the reports and all of the are actually should be supporting your financial decisions. So if you're not seeing that direct correlation between your financial decisions and the financial reporting, then there's a disconnect here, and you have to talk to your financial people to make sure that you're getting the reports that are actually useful to you. So I will put that out there as well.
I've talked to a few experts in the financial space, and they all say the same thing. It makes a lot of sense why you would want every screw and nail, like on a expense report or a WIP report or whatever budget, right? But at the end of the day, if you're spending more time then trying to like get into the dollars and cents, not the macro side, your time is valuable too. So finding ways to make sure those reports are giving you insights that let you move quickly to make sound decisions quickly is really that balance. It's funny. I've had a lot of, we'll call them debates, conversations. I don't know, where I would go to customers and we would argue is like, you don't need cost codes for 10,000 cost codes. They're like, no, I need to see exactly what I'm spending. I'm like, but you don't, because you're not going to actually be able to see anything in the ocean of information. So thank you for validating me at the very least. But if you're listening out there, it's okay. Like, do you have a recommendation of like how detailed they should go? Is there a level that you like to advise your customers on, especially in a WIP context of like what they're looking for?
So in the WIP context, the way how I like to see it and the way how I present it it's basically on a job level. We don't go directly into the cost codes. We do that as we're looking at the actual budget for the job, and then we're trying to figure out, how much cost has come through. I don't know, let's say labor for electricity, right? But in terms of the WIP report, I would not go into the detail, because you want to see a holistic overview of all your jobs. And the more jobs you have, that report, if you go into the cost code, is going to be a monstrosity. So you don't need that. What you need is essentially job A, how is it doing? Where's the cost? How much is cost is still expecting, meaning how much cash is going to go out? How much do I still need to bill? How much cash is going to come in, where we are, and whether we're overbilling and underbilling. That's really all you need to know. If you want to go into specific budget for a specific job, that's where I would go into the cost code. And again, I would actually start more of a summary in the cost codes. And then as you are working with these reports, especially if you're just creating them, make it so that it's not as granular. It's more of an overview of it. And then as you're working through these jobs, you can always add more. In the next job, when you're going to start, you can add more details. And that's where you're going to get a good balance of how much detail you actually need and how much detail is too much. Because it's hard to, if you're just starting to do this, it's kind of hard to figure out, where do I want to be? And a lot of people go into, I need to do all of the details. I need to know everything. But it ends up being an overkill, and people just get super, super overwhelmed with it, and they just don't end up using it. And at the end of the day, they're like, well, I'm just not going to read all through it, because it's too overwhelming.
Much, yeah.
So that's not going to serve you.
Yeah.
You have to find a good balance between too much and just enough.
And everybody's a little different. Some people are just more prone. They like the mess, and they're like, I need every piece in detail. So it's always a little bit of calibration. If you're not asking the question, is that really useful? Then there's a good chance you probably won't come to it in your own, like in a consulting space. It's kind of your job, right? To kind of challenge them to think like, are you going to get value out of this, or is it worth the work?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we've had a really great conversation about all things WIP. Is there anything else that you would like people to know about that report or anything in the construction financial management space that we can endow to our wonderful listeners?
So one of the things that I created specifically for this show is an actual video that walks you through the WIP report, because there's a lot of technicalities too. And I'm a very visual person, so it's a lot easier for me to see it visually versus, processing is auditory. So if you're interested in that, I actually have a video, and it gives you also a downloadable Excel version of WIP that you can use as an example, that you can either use it in your business or give it to your accountant and bookkeeper to say, hey, I want to see something like this if you don't have it. And you can find these resources at newcastle.finance/building code. So newcastle.finance/building code, you're going to have the video and the spreadsheet. So just go ahead and use it. I'm all about producing resources for construction and remodeling businesses that's going to help them have their business more healthy and sustainable in the long run.
Wow. Thank you so much, Kathy. That's awesome. I'm sure a 33-minute video is no short video editing. So thank you so much. And if for our listeners out there, I hope you can check it out. We'll link it in our show notes as well on our .com page where this podcast gets posted. Kathy, before I let you go, you have your own podcast as well, where you talk all things financial, I imagine. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it? What's it called? Where can we find it? What are your topics? We'd love to give you a little forum here to tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, thank you. So the name of the podcast is Help My Business is Growing, and you can find it anywhere that you're listening to podcasts. We're pretty much everywhere: Spotify, Amazon, Apple, wherever you find your podcast. And it's really about diving into the deep details of different topics, like, for example, sales, marketing, operations, that are going to affect your business financially as well. So we want to fix those problems before they become a problem financially. And that's where we go into and solve those types of issues. And I have all of these experts in their areas that they talk about the things that they see a problem in their businesses in these different areas. And then we connect them to the finances. So Help My Business is Growing.
I love it. Well, I'm going to check it out for sure. Our listeners, I'm sure will check it out. Thank you so much for coming on the Building Code today. It was great to have you, and you're always welcome back. I hope we can have you again and talk maybe a little income statements or profit and loss, maybe just educating me in general.
Sure. I'd love that. Thank you so much, Jack. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy. We just had Kathy Svetina over from NewCastle Finance. She's also the host of Help My Business is Growing. What a great name for a podcast. I love it. I'm going to be checking it out for sure. Really excited to kind of see what she talks with her customers, her guests, everyone who's on her podcast. Go check her out. She also mentioned those resources on WIP. I can't tell you how valuable that would be. I've traveled all over the United States. I've talked to a lot of bookkeepers, a lot of accountants, and this is a topic that is really challenging. We discussed it at length in the episode. You may not know what WIP is. You may be using WIP, but you're not sure necessarily if it's right. So you got to be looking for those warning signs. And these resources really help provide context of like, what exactly should I be doing? So Kathy, thank you so much for providing that. She even mentioned to me off air that she even has one between margin and markup, because I'll tell you what, if you're not running your business on margin, you're leaving money on the table. So check out in the show notes where we will link her website with those resources. It's newcastle.finance.us/building code. Go check it out. Free for everyone who's listening. And thank you so much for listening to the Building Code. It was really great to get into a little bit of a topic that can really help improve your business overall and the way that you're running it. So shout out to Kathy and everything she's doing to help contractors across America. That's it for today on the Building Code. Please don't forget to check us out on YouTube, where you can see me sitting by myself without Charlie, or even maybe some of our other co-hosts like Courtney and even John Walker. It's so great to work with you all with the Building Code and have our listeners. You can see it. Also download us where all podcasts are available: Spotify, Apple Music, so on and so forth. Thank you so much. I'm Zach Witovich, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks for watching the video. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for exclusive content brought to you by Buildertrend.